Myanmar's democratic reforms have been signaling the country is changing.
Important changes have been made. The economy has begun to grow. Political prisoners have been set free.
But then came crackdowns and arrests. Now the number of students, activists, and journalists being jailed is once again rising. Are the reforms for real or for show? I'm Steve Chow. On this episode of 101 East, we investigate new threats to democratic freedom in Myanmar.
It has been 5 years since Myanmar last held a nationwide election. In that time, the country has moved forward in ways that many never thought possible. Today, opposition parties are holding thumping campaign rallies all over the nation. Merely showing the flag of the opposition National League for Democracy Party, or NLD, would have once landed all these people in prison. But scratch the surface of this stunning transition, and a far more complex story emerges. I'm here to meet two women from two different generations of Myanmar activists. Both bravely stood up to authority in hopes of improving their country. And both were abruptly torn away from their families and imprisoned for their beliefs. Both risking it all to fight for justice.
There was a mess and there was fighting and beating. They ran after us with their shields and they beat us with their shields.
"20-year-old Yadana Supokai, also known as Popo, is a student who was caught up in one of the worst crackdowns since Myanmar's government put on its democratic face. In early 2015, students and activists protested over a controversial education law, which they say restricted academic freedom. Popo's boyfriend, Pailin Wedel, was one of the protest leaders.
We've written letters to the parliament, we've had a lot of meetings, and submitted a lot of demands. But they don't really care, so we have to have this march towards Yangon.
After a week-long standoff in a town called Lepadan, police violently broke up the protest lines, beating people and making arrests. A second wave of protesters took to the streets in Myanmar's largest city, Yangon. Popo was one of them.
When I joined them in the protest in Yangon, in my heart, I felt like crying because my comrades had been beaten up. My heart was pumping. That was when my chanting was the strongest. Many of my comrades suffered terribly.
More than 100 protesters were arrested. Human rights groups say 50 of them remain behind bars as unconvicted prisoners of conscience. After the protests, Popo hid from police for a month before being arrested when she returned home to visit her mother. How did you feel that your daughter is being taken away? During the dictatorship, every village had an informant that would report to the junta, and these networks are still very much in place. It was a neighbor who turned Popo in. After 4 months in jail, Popo was one of about 20 of the protesters who were granted bail. But her boyfriend, Mintuetet, remains behind bars. Popo has stepped up and taken over much of his work as the student union leader. She also makes time to teach disadvantaged students.
Education in our country is in the gutter. In the past, it was one of the best in Southeast Asia. Now it's the worst. Students feel responsible for saving our education system. That's why I got involved in the protest.
Popo and her boyfriend used to teach this class together, but it could be a while until they can do that again.
If my boyfriend and I are convicted, it will be 30 years for him and 9.5 years for me. I try not to think about it.
Despite the potentially harsh sentences, she says she didn't think twice about joining the movement.
I did this knowing very well what the consequences of our actions would be, that I would be imprisoned.
Myanmar has a long tradition of activists who suffered imprisonment and even torture. Mathan Da is one of them.
They forced me to stand still for 24 hours straight. They cuffed my hands together behind my back. They cuffed me and made me stand. They didn't let me eat or sleep. Standing there, I was beaten by 6 guys. They kicked me in the back, and one of my ribs was broken. This bitch is stubborn, they said. Beat her harder. There were often 6 or 7 men who would beat me together.
Mathan Da was put away for life for writing a letter critical of the junta. Her husband and daughter fled to Thailand. They would never really be together again. After her release as part of the government's amnesty in 2012, tragedy struck again. Her husband, Ong Chaw Nai, also known as Ko Pa Ji, was killed 1 year ago. She is still looking for answers.
When I met him, he was one of the bodyguards of Aung San Suu Kyi. He named our daughter Suu Pi Nai, Suu, after Aung San Suu Kyi.
After serving as a bodyguard of the popular opposition leader in the early 90s, Ko Pa Ji later became a journalist and an activist working on the border between Thailand and Myanmar. He would often be away for weeks at a time, but last October, he failed to turn up at their daughter's academic awards ceremony in Thailand.
When the time came for him to be in Chiang Mai for the ceremony, he didn't show up. We started wondering what had happened. He used to travel with work like that, so we thought maybe he had an assignment.
For almost a month, Mathan Da had no news of her husband. She traveled to the border region to search for him and kept asking questions. Finally, the military made a statement. It said that Ko Pa Ji was an insurgent and that he had been killed trying to escape custody. Mathan Da demanded an investigation. As public pressure grew, the military allowed her to exhume his body, where he was buried in a shallow grave. A post-mortem concluded that he had been shot 5 times, including under the chin.
They could have informed the family members, but they didn't. Why did they bury him in secrecy?
What we now know is that Ko Pa-ji was stopped while taking a trishaw taxi through the town of Jaima in Mon State. His friends say he was covering a conflict between the military and an ethnic armed group as a freelance journalist. An investigation by the National Human Rights Commission stated that a police officer detained him for acting suspiciously and handed him over to the military. He was held for 5 days before he was killed. By the time Mathanda found out he was dead, the 2 soldiers who shot him had already been tried in a military court and acquitted. Myanmar's Human Rights Commission was set up in 2011 as the government made moves towards democracy. Is it acceptable that the military can hold such an opaque trial?
Well, they did make a public announcement, whether how transparent it is or not, it's up to them, we can't intervene.
How much power does your office have in keeping the police and the military accountable?
Well, the main responsibility, as you know, to find a remedy rests with the government, the mandate of not only our commission, but all the Human Rights Commission is recommendatory and advisory. This is it.
Myanmar's military has always been notoriously secretive, but it recently announced a so-called True News Information Team, which is supposed to provide information to the media. With a translator, I decided to give it a call. So that was the number to the...
The number you dialed does not exist. Please check it and redial.
All right, I'll try the second number. Hi, my name is Pailin Wedel. I'm with 101 East, Al Jazeera. Did he give us a number?
No.
Hello?
သူကျွန်တော်ဖုန်းနံပါတ်နှလုံးပေးပါခင်ဗျာဘုံမူကြီးခင်မောင်ချိုရဲ့ဘုံမူကြီးမြင့်မင်းဦးရဲ့ခင်ဗျာသူတို့နှစ်ယောက်ကဘုံမူကြီးအဆက်အသွယ်ပါတဲ့ကျွန်တော်ပေးလိုက်သေးကြတာပေါ့ဟုတ်ကဲ့ကျွန်တော်တကယ်ပြောအမှာကဘုံချုပ်ကိုစားကဟိုမှာသူလည်းကျွန်တော်လို့ပုံဝင်နေပဲသူကဟိုဒီဥစ္စာတော့မင်းရဲ့ဘာသာဖြစ်လို့မင်းဘာသာရပ်ဖြစ်လို့မင်းရဲ့ subject ဖြစ်လို့မင်းပြောလိုက်ပါဟုတ်ကဲ့
We've now called multiple military officers listed as people who could comment on military affairs, but they keep passing us on to somebody else, so it doesn't look like we're going to get any more details on Ko Pa-ji's case. Seeking justice can be a long and complicated process in Myanmar, especially for political prisoners. Although hundreds were released when a semi-civilian government came to power 4 years ago, the numbers are now rising again. As of June, local rights groups say 164 political prisoners have been sentenced in Myanmar, while 400 await trial. Popo's boyfriend is one of them. Every Tuesday morning, as dawn breaks, Popo prepares to go visit him. The prison where Min Thuetet and the other protesters are held is in the township where they were arrested, a 3-hour journey from Yangon. A weekly court appearance gives Popo and other supporters a chance to see them in person. We wait for the bus at a local tea shop. Do you miss him? Yeah.
Yeah, it's been nearly 7 months going to Tayawadi every week. It is a long journey. It's a burden for my parents financially and emotionally.
The protesters organize their own bus to court. Some are supporters, others are on trial themselves. So if you weren't on this bus for 3 hours every single week, what would you be doing instead?
If I didn't do this, I'd have time to teach. If more students are released, we would get a lot more work done.
The journey is a bumpy ride, without air conditioning, across potholed roads. Many try and sleep to cope with the unbearable heat. We arrive exhausted, yet the day has only just begun. This is the court, and the prisoners are already here. There he is. Very crowded. Nice excited. Family members, lawyers, and well-wishers cram inside the courthouse to give the protesters food and precious time on their smartphones. It's been like this for months. Many here accuse the government of stalling the trial on purpose to keep the protesters behind bars for the pending election. Today is no exception. Word starts going around about a new set of delays. It doesn't look like there's a trial going on today. We're not sure what's happening, so we're going to go talk to the judge. So I noticed there's no one at a hearing today. What's going on? Why is there no trial?
At the township court, an order has been made concerning the defendant's car.
The judge gives us a long explanation about another court needing the case files concerning a car that was used in the protests. He says his court cannot resume until the files are returned, in about 2 months. Are you getting pressure from outside? I ask if the trials are being deliberately dragged out to keep the protesters in jail.
The court is not prolonging it. These things keep coming up because there's case upon case and it takes a lot of time. But it isn't taking that long.
Many of the protesters have been charged with unlawful public assembly and spreading anti-government sentiment. Some of these laws haven't changed since the British colonial era and the military dictatorship. Protesters like Pailin Wedel are charged with the same offense in each township that the protesters passed, which is why he could face up to 30 years in prison. He recalls the day of the brutal crackdown.
When they were beating me up, some hit me on the head, some even kicked me in the stomach. That was the first round of beatings I got. They beat me up so much that I was rolling around on the floor. In addition to this, there were some who asked me, "Are you the leader?" and hit me.
I ask him if he thinks Myanmar's democratic reforms are a sham.
Now they allow protests, but they charge the protesters with violating the law. In the past, they'd never allow a protest, and you wouldn't get a trial either. But the political culture has not changed yet. The justice system has not changed yet. The mindset of the authorities towards political activists also has not changed yet.
Pailin Wedel's short time with us is up. As he walks out to be taken back to jail, supporters hand him food and gifts. His role in the student protests has gained him a following. How do you feel right now?
I'm feeling sad right now because my comrades, who have been through thick and thin with me, are forced to get on that truck and leave me. But I can't just stand still and feel sad. I have many things to do in order to help them get out soon.
Do you have any hope that you will be reunited with him soon?
I know that they will be released when the time is right. We have to persevere until our goal is reached.
Raja Normand is the founder of Justice Trust, a nonprofit organization advising the protesters.
If crimes were committed, they were committed by the authorities in this case, and they were committed on camera. They were committed by the police.
So what has changed in the space of political activism, and what still needs to change?
There are red lines that civil society and people who want to engage in free speech cannot cross, and those red lines are actually pretty tight. They have to do with, are you challenging the military's monopoly on power? And if you are, you're going to be in trouble.
Red lines don't scare Mathanda. She has now filed a murder case against the military for her husband's death.
The military doesn't have authority over the judiciary. They cannot arrest a person. That's against the law. That's why I'm fighting this case, to bring justice.
Unsurprisingly, the case is stalled, with no word from the police about whether the trial will go forward. But instead of falling deeper in grief, she's decided to dive into politics and run for office under the banner of Aung San Suu Kyi's NLD party.
I run for office because there is no justice. I don't want any family to feel that there is no justice.
Today, we've come to her hometown of Pailin Wedel, deep in Myanmar's Irrawaddy Delta, the country's rice bowl. Every waking moment of Mathanda's life is spent on the campaign trail. Pailin Wedel has about 130,000 people. Most of them are farmers. She thinks she has a good chance.
I have no family, I have no money, but I have good friends. I travel in village, I speak to public, I'm with them. They think me.
Much of her time is spent traveling long distances by boat to far-flung corners of Myanmar's wet and swampy delta. Today, she's visiting a small ethnically Karen village, more than an hour away. So this village, how many people?
Over 1,000.
And how many NLD supporters?
I think over 500.
That's okay. That means you have to campaign pretty hard here. Mathanda has found a new mission in life.
When I go through villages, I don't think about anything else. I check the conditions in the village to see what they need. Do the villagers look happy or sad? Are they well off economically? How is their health and welfare? And then I look at the paddy fields. Is this village going to have a good yield?
The very fact that Mathanda can now campaign as an opposition politician does signal the huge changes here, but old habits die hard. Back in town, we realize we're being followed. A department called the Special Branch watched everyone during the days of the junta. We're gonna try and see what's going on here. And it seems this surveillance mechanism still exists. Can we ask you some questions? We've noticed that you've been following us and calling our translator. Can you tell us why? So do you do this for every foreigner that comes? And what is the job exactly? What do you need to record? Okay. So you're gonna follow us for the rest of the time we're here? Old attitudes and the influence of the military continue to threaten Myanmar's new democratic goals. Both Mathanda and Popo are doing their best to change their country. For Popo, the way forward is dissidence and protest. Mathanda hopes to fix the system from the inside. Two paths, two struggles, but for one dream, a free and fair Myanmar.